Hey guys, it's Courtney and I am here with another design team project for Scrapping for Less. Today I'm making a card using My Favorite Things, Our Story stamp set. And I'll be creating another scene, but we're going to be doing this a little bit different. I'm not creating a one-layer card here. So I have a piece of scrap Nina Solar White cardstock here, and I'll be stamping all of my images with Lawn Fawn's Jet Black ink. I will be Copic coloring these images like I normally do, but this time we're going to simplify the coloring a little bit, and we're going to mostly be doing just a two-color blend. For this little vase here, the first time I stamped it, it didn't really come out too well, so I just restamped that. And once everything is stamped and colored, we're going to be die cutting all of the images. I did end up stamping out this little stack of books, but in the end, we won't be using it. So for the coloring, I started off with this little side table here. And like I said, we're just going to be doing two colors. And I'm not going to be worried about shading as far as one object laying over another. I'm going to be focusing on just a center light source to make it nice and easy. I start off with my lightest color, which is the E33, map out where my darkest areas will be, which will be basically on either side. And then I'll go back in with my E33 after laying down my E37 and just blending that out. Next, we'll move on to this little chair that this little girl is sitting on. And again, just using two colors. I'm going to be laying out my lightest color. It'll basically be around her because she'll be casting a small shadow on that chair. And then I'll just make either side my darkest. You want to try to avoid putting in the darkest areas right next to each other. For example, the arm of that chair would be touching the cushion that she's sitting on, which will be dark. So I didn't want to create my darkest areas right next to each other. I went in with my darkest area and just did little flicks in the larger areas. And this will make it a little bit easier to blend when I go back in with my lightest color. And I just covered the entire area with that light color. Next, I will move on to her skin. And I'll start with my E01. My shadows for her will be basically where her hair would be laying over her face a little bit. I'll go in with my E13 and go over that same area and then blend that out again with my E01. For her hair, I'll start off with the darkest color. Especially being only using two colors, we won't get too much of a contrast with her hair, so I don't want them to overblend. So I'll start off with my darkest color and leave a highlight on either side of her little part. And on these little buns, I guess they are, I'll just add a little bit of shading around there. I'll go in with my lightest color and just blend that out a little bit. You will see that you still have a highlight. It's just not as pronounced as you would have if you used 3 or 4 colors. Next, I'll be coloring her little PJs. And again, starting off with my lightest color, avoiding putting two dark areas right next to each other. I'll go in with my R22 and add in those shadows and then back to my R01 to blend that out. For these little flowers in the vase, I'm not worrying about any shading at all. I'm just laying down just one single color. The vase itself I'll use two, but the flowers themselves, it'll just be one. For the lampshade, I'm doing no shadowing at all on either side. It will just be where these little lines are on the shade itself. And I'll blend that out again with my lightest color. For the leaves of the flowers in the vase, as well as this little succulent that's on the bookshelf, I just kept that one color as well. I did no shading at all. For the stand of the lamp, I wanted to make that look metallic. So I'm using my C5 and my C3. Usually your gray markers will blend pretty well, so there's really no need to go in with your lightest color first. You usually won't have a problem blending those out. Here I took just a variety of browns, and I'll be coloring the books. Again, doing no shading at all, except for the book that she's holding. But I'm just going to go in with a variety and mix those up. When I first started coloring, I only stuck to 2 color blends, mainly because I didn't have a whole lot of markers to start with. And it was hard to get used to Copics because I wasn't used to that brush nib. So I ruined a lot of nibs by pressing too hard. When you're blending and using the flicking motions in order to get a better blend, you just really want to touch the tip of the marker to your paper and flick it out until it's no longer touching your paper. Especially with things like hair and things like that, you want to vary your flicks. You don't want them to be all exactly the same. For the book that she's holding, I started off with my E31 and then went to my E37. Realized they were a little too far apart, so I ended up going back in with my E33 instead of the E31 and got a much better blend. For the little pages of the books, I'm going to go back in with my C markers. At first I was just going to use the one, but I did go in after it just wasn't blending. It just didn't look right. So I did go back in with my C1 and blended that out a little bit. I colored the vase for the flowers as well as the one for the succulent, the same colors as I used for the chair. Now you'll see that there's little lines in that vase. Use those when you're practicing coloring. Try to find stamped images that have those lines in it that will show you where shadows and highlights should be. It'll help guide you and get to know not only how to use the markers, but how to do your shading. For this little bookshelf, I'm going to be using the same 2 colors as I used for her hair. And I'll go in with my colorless blender and just clean up some areas where I went out of the lines. I tend to be a little messy sometimes. Usually a colorless blender will take out pretty much anything other than reds. So next I'm using this wonky stitched rectangle die, and I'm using the largest and the second to largest. And I'm going to be die cutting a frame as well as the largest panel. And I went ahead and die cut my images as well. For my background, I didn't want to just keep it plain white, so I'm using a piece of Post-it note tape here, and I'm going to be using Antique Linen Distress Oxide ink to come up from the bottom towards the middle, so the area that will be the darkest will be the bottom, and you'll barely be able to see the line from the Post-it note tape. I went ahead and removed that and did the same thing for, I guess, what would be the wall. And I wasn't holding the cardstock the way I probably should have, and it did kind of come up and wrinkle there, but I think my images will cover it enough where you're not going to notice it. So next I just laid out my images to kind of get an idea of how my placement would be. That frame is going to go on there last, so I want to make sure that I don't cover up the sides completely, where that will cover up my images once I add that with my foam tape. So most of my images I did go ahead and adhere flat down to the cardstock, with the exception of the little girl. I did pop her up with Scotch foam tape. And any areas that I see here that I may have went out of the lines, I'll go back in with my colorless blender or a white gel pen if it's a darker color, and just cover that area up. I snipped off the bottom of the stand of this lamp because I realized it wasn't going to fit. It was going to go off the top of the page. My plan was to put that little stack of books in front of the lamp so you didn't notice that I had cut off the stand of it. But I didn't leave myself enough room, so I just left those out. Next, I went in with my white Jelly Roll pen and added a few little reflections on the side of the chair, on the arm of the chair, and on this little vase. This will also give you a little bit more dimension if you are only using two colors, or if you just didn't get the blend that you're looking for. Just add a few little details with your white gel pen and you won't even notice. Next, I stamped my sentiment from that same stamp set with VersaFine Onyx black ink right in the center on the bottom of my little scene that I had created. And I will go ahead and adhere that first panel flat down onto an A2 top folding note card. For my little frame, I added Scotch foam tape. I did have to cut this in thirds in order for it to fit and not hang over. And I just went around my entire panel and created that frame. And that is it for today. I will be having a giveaway over on my Instagram for this stamp set, Our Story, as well as the My Favorite Things Hooray die. So head on over to my Instagram for a chance to win those two items. Thank you so much for stopping by, and I hope you guys have a great day.